Eligible Receiver 1997 was a JCS-sponsored no-notice interoperability exercise emphasizing realistic joint contingency operations, and for the first time, elements of modern information warfare. This presentation is based on edited interviews with Navy Captain Michael Sayer, the DoD Red Team leader, and Mr. Keith Abernathy, the DoD Red Team Chief Targeting Officer.
We know quite clearly how to take the DII down and how to attack the United States in an information warfare campaign.
By 8 o'clock local time Thursday morning, they no longer had confidence in their capability to mobilize and project forces to respond.
There has never been a JCS exercise devoted to IW or IO. The eligible receiver series of exercises are Joint Chiefs of Staff controlled. They've been going on for about a dozen years. There's nothing new there. What was new, however, was the information operations or information warfare slant on this particular exercise. The whole purpose of these no-notice exercises that the Joint Chiefs of Staff run are to improve the readiness of U.S. forces to conduct joint contingency operations. These exercises are specifically designed to exercise crisis action planning procedures on a no-notice basis, so it evokes a real reaction from the exercise participants. They're designed to exercise command and control relationships, communications connectivity, and most importantly for ER-97, the exercise just completed, DoD's relationships with other federal agencies. Planning for eligible receiver at the National Security Agency began in 1996. A small handful of people who were appropriately cleared into the program at that time began laying the groundwork for the IW campaign in support of JCS objectives. The timing of the exercise, the targeted SYNC, in this case U.S. SYNC PAC in Hawaii, and the nature of the exercise, the specific details, are strictly held in compartmented channels to support the no-notice nature of the program. The Red Team was formed in response to JCS requirement to act as a threat to the United States that was going to use information.
Type of people necessary to do this. It's important to note that while we had some highly qualified people, after researching the capability of the OPFOR or Notional Opposition Force, we had to seldom call upon their full capabilities. We were trying to represent an accurate threat to the level that we perceived through intelligence that the Red Team would be able to operate. This was done as a global event. We had the headquarters, which was notionally in Canada but physically located at
We were faced with a very interesting situation. That is, there was a no-notice exercise that had not even been announced yet that it was coming. And yet we were required to do reconnaissance of both the MILNET and the SIPRNet ahead of time to be able to characterize our attack for approval. This required us to actually conduct reconnaissance in such a way that we looked as if we were real to the outside world. This was done with commercial internet service providers, and it was from those providers that we touched military sites in the Navy and in the Air Force and so on in order to gain our information, to do our open source research, to do our web surfing on the internet and move off from there.
How we went about doing the reconnaissance was we looked for access points, ways to get into the DII or the .mil domain, better known as MILNet or NIPRNet. We needed to get in. The team was able to do a number of things. Denial of service, which was the way we were able to text files that described the type of attack that would have been placed there given that kind of access by a bad guy. So when the system administrators were notified during the play from the exercise controllers to look for file name so-and-so and directory so-and-so, what they found was a text file that says a denial of service attack such as this would have been initiated at this time had this been real. Call the controller for a sheet for damage assessment and so forth. So there was a rather elaborate process that was put in place for the sysadmins to report what kind of damage would have occurred both physically and operationally had it been a real attack. We did do data exfiltration though. We needed to know what systems to go after, for example. So we paid very close attention to what we could have to achieve our objectives. Again, looping back to the J3's assessment of the situation, we pretty much had the blue team on the run by the third day of the actual exercise. So the need to play all of our capability wasn't there. We only played about 30% of what we could have. So the message there is it could have been a lot worse. Okay, in my own words, what happened was we had a relatively small number of people, totaling about 40, about 30 of which were full-time, about 10 that were part-time augmentation, supporting field capability of about a dozen people, using off-the-shelf capabilities, if you will, readily available and open source, using technology equipment that was available in open source with the exception of the Stu3, which was stolen, but everything else was stuff you could go into Computer City and buy. Was able to, in the J3's own words, significantly affect the command and control capability of U.S. forces. Okay, the detection mechanisms worked well, in my opinion. The reporting did not. What we're seeing now, well after the exercise, is a lot of data that would have pointed towards activity that was compromising Blue being reported now 2 weeks after the events occurred. My analogy is they now know that the horse is out of the barn after it burned down and the ashes are cold. This one fellow who absolutely deserves a medal. If I can find out who he or she is, I want to shake his or her hand. Marine at Marine Force Pacific actually TA'd what we were doing early on and reconfigured his or her firewall to allow only those people that were necessary in and only out to whoever was necessary. Basically did a minimize based on the threat perception that allowed their mission to continue but shut us off. It was actually a host system behind that firewall that we had planned as being a major strategic target that was denied to us because this person took early action based on identifying the threat and formulating a response. So what we have, though, is a list of all of the systems with vulnerabilities. And we have teams that are coming out to the field to work with the system administrators, the J6 types, as well as provide information to the commands about exactly what was done that are going to help with the cleanup. Our InfoSec goal in this, our value added beyond just being a red team, is that since we know how to defeat the systems there, we also know how to make it harder for us to do that. And if it's harder for us to do that, we believe it makes it harder for the real bad guys to do that. Where we fall down is in taking the time to integrate what we've developed into our normal mode of operation. We tend to fight everything by throwing technology and money at it and not spending the time it takes to get the people to learn how to use it effectively.
The most important lesson that we learned on the Red Team, given how we approached the U.S. as a target, on open source alone, no insider information, is that we know quite clearly how to take the DII down and how to attack the United States in an information warfare campaign. Apply them to make the nation stronger.